This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a doctor, and nothing in this episode should be taken as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before starting, stopping, or combining any supplement, peptide, medication, or wellness protocol. Especially if you are pregnant, breastfeeding, have a medical condition, take prescription medications, or have a neurological or psychiatric diagnosis. Welcome back to the Peptide Effect Podcast. Today we are diving into a topic that has become one of the most hyped, most searched, and most misunderstood compounds in the peptide and longevity world. BDNF. 3 letters that people are whispering about like it is the holy grail of brain repair. And honestly, in some ways I get it. Because if you have ever dealt with brain fog, depression, anxiety, low motivation, burnout, memory issues, ADHD symptoms, post-concussion symptoms, or even that feeling of, I just don't feel like myself anymore, then BDNF is probably something you have heard mentioned. It is often called the brain's fertilizer, the miracle molecule for neuroplasticity, the thing that makes your brain grow new connections. And people love that idea. The idea that you could take something, inject something, stack something, and suddenly your brain starts rewiring itself like you are installing a brand new operating system. But today we are going to slow down. We are going to explain what BDNF really is, what it does, why everyone wants it, what the science actually says, what the peptide world claims, and what realistic expectations should be. Because BDNF is not magic, but it is powerful. And if you understand it correctly, you can use it as a tool. So let's get into it. BDNF stands for Brain-Derived Neurotrophic Factor. That is a mouthful, so we will just call it BDNF like everyone else. And BDNF is not technically a peptide you just take like C-Max or C-Link. BDNF is something your body naturally produces. It is a protein, and it functions as a growth factor in the brain. Think of it like Miracle-Gro for neurons. It supports the survival of existing neurons. It encourages the growth of new neurons. And it strengthens the connections between neurons. That strengthening of connections is what we call synaptic plasticity. And synaptic plasticity is basically the foundation of learning, memory, and brain performance. So when someone says, I want a sharper brain, what they are really saying is, I want stronger neural pathways, better signaling, and more efficient communication between brain cells. BDNF is a huge part of that. Now here is where it gets interesting. BDNF does not just help your brain grow. It helps your brain adapt. And adaptation is everything. Your brain is constantly responding to your environment. Stress, trauma, sleep, exercise, nutrition, social connection, loneliness, alcohol, inflammation, hormones, all of it. Your brain is not static. It is alive, it is changing, and it is always remodeling. And BDNF is one of the main biological signals that tells your brain whether to build or break down. That is why BDNF has become such a major focus in mental health research. Because low BDNF levels have been associated with depression, anxiety, neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and cognitive decline. Now, I want to be clear. Low BDNF does not automatically mean you have depression. And high BDNF does not automatically mean you are immune to it. But it is a marker that correlates strongly with brain resilience. So imagine BDNF like your brain's repair crew. When BDNF is high, your brain is more capable of bouncing back. When BDNF is low, your brain is more vulnerable. And that is why people are obsessed with it. Because who does not want a brain that heals faster, thinks clearer, and stays younger longer? Now, let's talk about what BDNF actually does inside your body. BDNF binds to a receptor called TRKB. That is spelled TRKB. When BDNF binds to TRKB, it triggers a cascade of intracellular signaling. That signaling leads to neuron growth, neuron survival, and improved communication between brain cells. Basically, BDNF flips the switch that tells your brain, we are building now. Now, here is where we start seeing why it is so important. Because your brain is not just about memory and learning. Your brain is also the command center for mood regulation. Your brain controls motivation, reward pathways, impulse control, emotional processing, resilience, even appetite and cravings. So when BDNF is low, you may feel more anxious, more depressed, more impulsive, more emotionally reactive, more fatigued mentally, and even more likely to reach for dopamine hits, like sugar, alcohol, shopping, scrolling, or whatever your brain uses to self-medicate. When BDNF is higher, people often report feeling mentally stable, more emotionally grounded, more motivated, more capable of handling stress, and more mentally sharp. Now, BDNF is not the only thing involved in that, but it is a major player. Now, let's address the big question. Why does everyone suddenly want BDNF? Because a lot of people feel mentally broken. And I do not mean that dramatically. I mean literally. Modern life is brutal on the nervous system. We have chronic stress. We have sleep deprivation. We have blue light exposure at all hours. We have inflammatory diets. We have toxic overload. We have gut issues. We have hormonal disruption. We have overworking. And we have constant stimulation. Your brain never gets a break. And people feel it. They feel burned out. They feel like they cannot focus. They feel like their memory is slipping. They feel like their personality is duller. They feel like they have lost their spark. And then they hear about BDNF. They hear that BDNF helps grow neurons. They hear it supports brain repair. They hear it is linked to happiness and motivation. And they think, okay, I need that. And that is understandable, because BDNF is a real biological pathway. It is not just internet hype, but the way people talk about it online is often exaggerated. So, let's get into the truth. One of the most important things to understand is that BDNF is not something you can just flood your body with and expect miracles. Your brain does not work like that. BDNF is tightly regulated, and it is influenced by lifestyle, environment, and inflammation. Meaning you can take the fanciest compounds in the world, but if you are sleeping 4 hours a night, eating garbage, and living in constant stress, your BDNF system is going to struggle. But the good news is, BDNF is highly responsive. And this is where it gets exciting. Because one of the strongest, most proven ways to increase BDNF is exercise. Specifically aerobic exercise. Cardio. Running. Cycling. Swimming. Even brisk walking. It increases BDNF significantly. And not just a little. Studies have shown measurable increases in BDNF after exercise sessions. That is one reason why exercise is so powerful for depression. Because it literally changes brain chemistry. It increases BDNF. It improves neuroplasticity. And it helps regulate mood. Another major BDNF booster is strength training. Yes, weightlifting can also increase BDNF, especially when combined with intense effort. Another big one is cold exposure. Cold plunges. Cold showers. Cryotherapy. Cold exposure activates norepinephrine and dopamine pathways, and it can influence BDNF expression as well. Sleep is another major factor. If you do not sleep, your brain cannot repair, and BDNF levels suffer. Nutrition also matters. Omega-3 fatty acids like fish oil are linked to improved BDNF. Polyphenol, like blueberries, green tea, and curcumin, can support BDNF. And one of the biggest BDNF killers is chronic inflammation. So if you have autoimmune issues, metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, gut dysbiosis, or chronic stress, your BDNF levels may be suppressed. Now, here is where the peptide community steps in. Because people hear all of this and they say, okay, exercise, sleep, nutrition, great. But I want faster results. And that is where the phrase BDNF peptide gets thrown around. So, let's talk about that. There is something important to understand. BDNF itself is a large protein. It does not cross the blood-brain barrier easily. So you cannot just inject BDNF into your body and expect it to go straight to your brain and start repairing everything. It is not that simple. And that is why most real medical research focuses on things that increase your body's own BDNF production, rather than trying to deliver BDNF directly. However, there are compounds, peptides, and nootropics that can influence BDNF signaling. Some increase BDNF expression. Some increase TRKB activation. Some reduce inflammation so BDNF can rise naturally, and some mimic certain neurotrophic pathways. So when people say they're taking BDNF, what they often mean is they're taking something that increases BDNF. And in the peptide world, the most famous ones for this are Cmax and C-Link. Cmax is often associated with increased BDNF expression and neuroprotective effects. C-Link has anxiolytic effects and can support neurotransmitter balance. And many people stack them together. And then there are other compounds like cerebrallicin, which is not a peptide exactly in the same way, but it is often talked about in brain repair circles. There are also compounds like dihexa, which is heavily hyped and is often marketed as a brain growth compound. There is also NSI-189, which is more of a research compound, but it is discussed in neurogenesis communities. Then you have lion's mane mushroom, which supports nerve growth factor, and while that is not BDNF directly, it works in similar territory. And you have things like omega-3, magnesium threonate, and even ketones. But BDNF remains the celebrity, because BDNF is the buzzword people latch onto. Now, let's talk about why BDNF is called the brain repair molecule. Because it plays a role in neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the creation of new neurons. For a long time, scientists believed adults could not grow new neurons. They believed you were born with a fixed number of brain cells, and once they were gone, they were gone. But we now know that is not true. The adult brain can generate new neurons, especially in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is critical for learning and memory. It is also deeply involved in emotional regulation. And BDNF is one of the key factors that supports neurogenesis in the hippocampus. So if you're someone who has had trauma, chronic stress, or depression, your hippocampus can literally shrink. That is not a metaphor. Chronic stress increases cortisol, and cortisol can reduce neurogenesis. Depression has been associated with reduced hippocampal volume. But when BDNF rises, the hippocampus can recover. And that is why antidepressants are also linked to BDNF. Many antidepressants, particularly SSRIs, have been shown to increase BDNF over time. Not immediately, but over weeks. And that is part of why antidepressants take time to work. Because they are not just changing serotonin, they are helping the brain remodel. And BDNF is part of that remodeling process. Now, this is where the conversation gets fascinating. Because it means mood disorders are not just chemical imbalances. They are structural. They involve changes in brain connectivity. They involve changes in neuroplasticity. And BDNF is a major switch that controls those changes. So if someone is stuck in a depressive loop, they may not just be low on serotonin. They may be low on neuroplasticity. They may be stuck in rigid brain wiring. And increasing BDNF could help the brain become flexible again. That is huge. Now, let's talk about what people feel when they increase BDNF. Because this is what everyone wants to know. What does it actually feel like? People often describe it as mental clarity, better memory, better recall, better verbal fluency, more motivation, more drive, less anxiety, less emotional reactivity, more stable mood, better sleep quality, and sometimes a weird feeling of mental energy, like the brain is waking up. Some people even describe it as feeling like their brain is repairing. But let me tell you something. A lot of these effects are subtle. This is not like caffeine. It is not like Adderall. It is not like a dopamine rush. BDNF effects are more like the slow rebuilding of a foundation. And the best way to describe it is this. It is not that you suddenly feel high. It is that you feel more like yourself. More capable. More sharp. More resilient. And you notice it most when you look back and realize you are handling life better than you were before. Now, I want to talk about a major misconception. People assume that more BDNF is always better. But biology does not work like that. Your brain needs balance. Too little neuroplasticity is a problem. But too much uncontrolled neuroplasticity could also be problematic. Because plasticity means change. And change can be adaptive, but it can also mean instability. This is why certain neurological conditions involve abnormal growth factor signaling. Now, in normal healthy adults, increasing BDNF through lifestyle is extremely beneficial. But the idea of mega-dosing BDNF-related compounds without a plan is not something to treat casually. So the goal is not to max out BDNF like it is a high score. The goal is to support healthy brain function, recovery, and resilience. Now, let's talk about what lowers BDNF, because this part is equally important. Chronic stress lowers BDNF. High cortisol lowers BDNF. Poor sleep lowers BDNF. Alcohol lowers BDNF. Excess sugar and processed foods can lower BDNF. Inflammation lowers BDNF. Sedentary lifestyle lowers BDNF. Social isolation can lower BDNF. And one of the biggest ones is depression itself. Depression is linked to lower BDNF, and lower BDNF can worsen depression. It becomes a vicious cycle. So, if you want to raise BDNF, you do not just add things. You also remove things. That means reducing stress, improving sleep hygiene, moving your body, eating anti-inflammatory foods, fixing gut health, and stabilizing blood sugar. And yes, peptides can help. But peptides should be a tool, not a replacement for the foundation. Now, let's talk about BDNF and brain injury. This is one of the most exciting areas. After traumatic brain injury, concussion, stroke, or neuroinflammation, BDNF is involved in recovery. It helps neurons survive. It helps rebuild connections. It supports rehabilitation. And people who have higher BDNF responses tend to recover better. So if someone has had a concussion and they feel like their brain has never been the same, BDNF is a pathway worth focusing on. Now, what about neurodegenerative disease? Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. These conditions involve inflammation, oxidative stress, immune dysfunction, and progressive damage to neurons. BDNF is not a cure, but it is a protective factor. Many studies suggest that reduced BDNF is linked to cognitive decline, and strategies that increase BDNF may slow progression or support cognitive function. Now, I know people listening are thinking, okay, tell me how to get more BDNF. So, let's go into practical strategies. First, exercise. If you do one thing, do this. Cardio, 3 to 5 times a week. Even 20 minutes. Brisk walking counts. Zone 2 training counts. It does not have to be intense, but consistency matters. Second, strength training. 2 to 4 times per week. Because muscle is not just about aesthetics. Muscle is an endocrine organ. It releases myokines that influence brain function. Third, sleep. Your brain needs deep sleep for repair. If you want BDNF, you need sleep. Fourth, sunlight exposure. Morning sunlight helps regulate circadian rhythm, cortisol rhythm, and melatonin. This supports brain recovery. Fifth, omega-3 fatty acids. EPA and DHA. Fish oil. Wild salmon. Sardines. These support brain membrane health and are linked to increased BDNF signaling. Sixth, polyphenol. Blueberries. Dark chocolate. Green tea. Curcumin. These reduce inflammation and oxidative stress. Seventh, fasting. Intermittent fasting and caloric restriction have been linked to increased BDNF in some studies, because fasting activates pathways like autophagy and ketone production. Ketones are neuroprotective, and ketones may support BDNF expression. Eighth, cold exposure. Cold plunges. Cold showers. Even short cold exposure can stimulate catecholamines and may influence BDNF. Now, those are the lifestyle foundations. But what about peptides? Let's talk about the peptide angle because this is what everyone is here for. When people say they're taking BDNF as a peptide, they often mean one of a few things. They may be using Cmax. Cmax is a synthetic peptide derived from ACTH fragments, and it has been studied for neuroprotection, cognitive enhancement, and recovery after stroke. Cmax is believed to influence BDNF and nerve growth factor expression. Many users report improved focus, improved mood, and reduced brain fog. They describe it as clean mental energy. Not jittery. Not overstimulating. Just clarity. Then there is C-Link. C-Link is another Russian-developed peptide, often used for anxiety and stress resilience. It has effects on GABAergic systems and can influence neurotransmitters. C-link is not as strongly associated with BDNF as Cmax, but it is part of the same neuropeptide world. And when people stack Cmax and C-link, they often report a balanced effect. More calm, more focus, less emotional chaos. Then there is cerebrolacin. Cerebrolacin is a mixture of neuropeptides derived from pig brain proteins. Yes, I said pig brain. It has been used in Europe and other countries for stroke recovery and dementia. It is thought to mimic neurotrophic factors, including BDNF-like activity.
Some people swear by it.
Some people are skeptical, but it is widely discussed in the biohacking world for brain repair. Then you have dihexa. Dihexa is extremely hyped as a compound that supports synaptogenesis, the creation of synapses, the connections between neurons. It is not BDNF, but it operates in similar territory of brain growth and connectivity. It has a reputation for being powerful, but it is also controversial, and it is not something to treat casually. Now, there are also other compounds that indirectly raise BDNF. Magnesium threonate, because magnesium is involved in synaptic function. Rhodiola, ashwagandha, certain nootropics, even creatine. Yes, creatine. Creatine is not just for muscles. It supports brain energy metabolism, and improved brain energy can support neuroplasticity. Now, another important point is this. BDNF does not just affect the brain. It affects the entire nervous system. BDNF plays a role in peripheral nerves as well, meaning it can influence nerve regeneration outside the brain. And it also plays a role in pain signaling. Some chronic pain conditions are linked to altered BDNF signaling. So again, BDNF is not just a mood molecule. It is a nervous system molecule. Now, let's talk about something else. BDNF and dopamine. Because this is where people start getting excited. BDNF supports dopamine neurons, especially in areas of the brain related to reward and motivation. And dopamine is the chemical of drive. Dopamine is what makes you get up and go. Dopamine is what makes you feel excited about life. Dopamine is what makes you want to pursue goals. So when people have low dopamine, they often feel apathetic, unmotivated, lazy, but not lazy in a character flaw way. Lazy in a neurochemical way. They want to do things, but they cannot access the energy. BDNF supports the health of dopamine pathways. And that is one reason why increasing BDNF can make people feel more motivated. Now, BDNF is also linked to serotonin signaling. And serotonin is involved in mood stability. So BDNF supports the entire neurochemical ecosystem. And that is why it is being studied so heavily. Now let's talk about BDNF and aging. Because this is a big reason longevity people care. As we age, BDNF tends to decline. Neuroplasticity declines. The brain becomes less adaptable. Memory gets weaker. Learning gets harder. Mood becomes more fragile. And cognitive decline becomes a risk. But the exciting part is that BDNF is not locked. Even older adults can increase BDNF through exercise, nutrition, and cognitive stimulation. And cognitive stimulation is another BDNF booster. Learning a new skill, playing an instrument, learning a new language, doing puzzles, reading, writing, even challenging conversations. Your brain responds to challenge by increasing plasticity. So if you want BDNF, you have to use your brain. You cannot just inject something and then scroll TikTok for 6 hours. Your brain has to be challenged. BDNF is like fertilizer, but fertilizer only matters if you are growing something. So you need the stimulus. Now let's talk about BDNF and trauma. Because this is deep. People who have experienced trauma often have nervous systems that are stuck in fight or flight. Chronic hypervigilance, chronic anxiety, chronic cortisol, chronic stress hormones. And that environment suppresses neuroplasticity. So healing trauma is not just emotional, it is biological. And BDNF is one of the factors that supports recovery. This is why therapy, meditation, exercise, and even psychedelics have been linked to changes in neuroplasticity. Because trauma is not just a memory. It is a wiring pattern. And rewiring requires plasticity. Now, speaking of psychedelics, This is another area where BDNF gets mentioned. Psilocybin and other psychedelic compounds have been shown to increase neuroplasticity markers, and BDNF is often part of that discussion. That is why people call psychedelics brain reset compounds, because they may increase plasticity and allow new patterns to form. Now, I am not endorsing anything illegal or unsafe. I am just explaining the biology.
But it shows how important BDNF is.
Now, another important topic is BDNF and inflammation. Because inflammation is like rust in the brain. Inflammation reduces neuroplasticity. Inflammation impairs neurotransmitter production. Inflammation increases oxidative stress. Inflammation can damage the blood-brain barrier. And when inflammation is high, BDNF signaling tends to be disrupted. So if someone is trying to optimize BDNF but they have chronic inflammation, they may not see results. This is why gut health is so important. The gut-brain axis is real. If you have gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, or chronic digestive inflammation, your brain is going to feel it. And your BDNF system may not function optimally. Now, I want to address one of the biggest myths. People think BDNF is a supplement. They think it is like vitamin C. It is not. BDNF is a biological growth factor. It is something your body makes. And the goal is to create the environment where your body produces it. That environment is built through movement, sleep, recovery, and reduced inflammation. Peptides can support the process, but they do not replace it. Now, let's talk about dosing because I know people are curious. And I'm going to be careful here because this is a research area and not something that is standardized. There is no universally accepted BDNF injection dose like there is for something like B12. If you see BDNF sold directly as a peptide, you need to understand that BDNF is fragile, complex, and difficult to deliver effectively. It is not like a simple peptide with a stable structure. So the quality, purity, and delivery method matter a lot. Most people who are trying to increase BDNF use upstream peptides like Cmax. Or they use protocols that support neurogenesis indirectly. So instead of asking, how much BDNF do I inject? A better question is, how do I stimulate my body to increase BDNF naturally and safely? And that is where protocols come in. A realistic BDNF boosting protocol might look like this. Morning sunlight, hydration, cardio or weight training, cold exposure, high-protein anti-inflammatory meals, omega-3 intake, curcumin, magnesium at night, consistent sleep schedule, and then a neuropeptide stack like Cmax, possibly combined with C-Link. That is how most serious people approach it, because BDNF is a system, not a single-shot miracle. Now, let's talk about results timeline, because this matters. If you raise BDNF, you may feel subtle improvements in days, especially if you're using nootropics. But true brain remodeling takes time. Neuroplastic changes happen over weeks and months. This is why people who start exercising consistently often say, after about 6 weeks, I felt like a different person. That is BDNF. That is neurogenesis. That is improved dopamine signaling. That is improved mitochondrial function. That is nervous system recovery. So if you are chasing BDNF, you need patience. You are literally rebuilding your brain. Now, what about side effects? Most lifestyle BDNF boosting strategies are extremely safe. Exercise is safe, if done appropriately. Sleep is safe. Omega-3 is safe. Cold exposure is safe if you do not overdo it. But when it comes to peptides and research compounds, side effects vary. Cmax can sometimes cause headaches. Some people report overstimulation. Some report irritability if the dose is too high. C-Link is usually calming, but can still affect mood and neurotransmitters. Cerebrolizin can cause injection site reactions, fatigue, or headaches in some people. And compounds like dihexa are controversial and not well studied for long-term safety. So if you're going to play in the brain repair world, respect it. Your brain is not something to experiment on recklessly. Now, let's talk about one of the most interesting things about BDNF. BDNF is activity-dependent, meaning your brain releases BDNF in response to stimulation. When you learn, when you move, when you challenge yourself, when you push through discomfort, Your brain responds by saying, okay, we need to adapt. And BDNF is released to support that adaptation. This is why people who live easy lives often feel mentally dull. Because the brain is not being challenged. And the brain is not being stimulated to grow. So if you want more BDNF, you need to do things that are uncomfortable. You need to learn new things. You need to push yourself physically. You need to engage socially. You need to practice skills. And yes, even emotional growth can stimulate neuroplasticity. Now, one more fascinating area is BDNF and addiction recovery. People recovering from addiction often have damaged dopamine reward pathways. And BDNF plays a role in rewiring reward circuits. Some studies suggest that altered BDNF signaling is involved in addiction and relapse vulnerability. So supporting healthy BDNF pathways may be part of long-term recovery. Again, not a cure, but part of the puzzle. Now, let's talk about something else people ask. Does BDNF help with weight loss? Indirectly, yes. Because your brain controls appetite, cravings, impulse control, and motivation. If your brain is healthier, you make better decisions. If dopamine signaling is improved, you are less likely to chase quick pleasure through food. If stress resilience is improved, cortisol cravings are reduced. So BDNF is not a fat loss peptide. But brain health is a massive part of body composition. And people ignore that. They think weight loss is just calories. But it is also behavior. And behavior is brain chemistry. Now, does BDNF help with muscle growth? Not directly. But again, if motivation is improved and your nervous system is healthier, your training improves. And better training leads to better muscle. So BDNF is more like a performance enhancer for your entire life. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Why is BDNF being marketed as a peptide everyone wants? Because brain fog is an epidemic. Because burnout is everywhere. Because depression is everywhere. Because people are tired of feeling numb. And because the idea of brain repair is incredibly attractive. But here is what I want you to take away. BDNF is not a trend. It is a real biological pathway. And it is one of the most powerful pathways you can influence. But the best BDNF protocol is not found in a vial. It is found in your daily habits. Peptides can support. Supplements can support. But your lifestyle is the signal that tells your brain what to become. Now, if you want to create a practical action plan after listening to this episode, here is what I would recommend. Number 1.
Move your body daily.
Even if it is just walking. Number 2. Do cardio at least 3 times a week. Number 3. Lift weights 2 to 4 times a week. Number 4. Prioritize sleep like your life depends on it, because your brain does. Number 5. Reduce alcohol and processed foods. Number 6. Add omega-3 and anti-inflammatory nutrients. Number 7. Challenge your brain. Learn something new.
Read. Write.
Practice a skill. Number 8. Manage stress. Meditation. Breath work. Journaling. Therapy. Nature. Number 9. If you choose to explore peptides, start with the ones with the best reputation for neuroprotection like Cmax and C-Link, and do it responsibly. And number 10. Track your results. Because brain improvement is not always obvious day to day. But over weeks, you will see it. You will feel sharper, more stable, more motivated, more alive. And that is what people are really chasing. Not just BDNF. They are chasing their spark. Now, before we wrap up, I want to say this. If you are someone who feels mentally exhausted, emotionally burned out, or like your brain is not working the way it used to, you are not alone. And you are not broken. Your nervous system is responding to the world you live in. And the beautiful thing about neuroplasticity is that your brain can change. Your brain can heal. Your brain can rebuild. And BDNF is one of the biggest keys to making that happen. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a doctor, and nothing in this episode should be taken as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before starting, stopping, or combining any supplement, peptide, medication, or wellness protocol. Thanks for listening, keep learning, and stay curious.